Veteran Uncharted writer and director Amy Hennig recently praised Sony for basically focusing on single-player experiences.
But is there really a future for AAA single-player games?
I actually have no idea.
Hot take!
Okay, that was a little bit of a lie. I know quite a bit about single-player experiences and basically what it holds for the future, but I wanted to make it a little bit more exciting, but now that's all kind of fell off. You guys can go away now and unsubscribe. Please don't.
He's a stinking liar.
Yeah, so if you people out there don't know who Amy Hennig is, you really should. Now, Amy Hennig has been in the industry for quite some time. She was a part of a bunch of other companies like...
Yeah, Crystal Dynamics. She worked on the Legacy of Kain series.
An amazing series of games.
Yeah, Jak and Daxter.
Again, another amazing series of games.
As we had mentioned, she worked on the Uncharted series as well.
Yes. Now, what's really interesting about Uncharted is I am a fan of the series, but mostly not as a game. I'm not so upset with the way the game's controlled. They're very basic to me, but it's the characters and the story, and that's the kind of stuff that really pulls me into that world, and that really is Amy Hennig's, like, forte. That's what she did. She made those games as amazing as they are from the narrative perspective. And, you know, it's an argument. A lot of people out there actually like the gameplay of it, but for me personally, it's always been about that story, right. And that's really what she's all about.
And those experiences are the more, like, streamlined experiences, right? And we're seeing some of those AAA experiences nowadays. We've seen God of War come out recently. The focus I think that she is kind of pointing to with her statement isn't so much like the open world single player experiences, but the more Uncharted, like, you know, not necessarily you're running through hallways, but linear.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. Yeah, right? So, what Tomb Raider has become, I mean, Tomb Raider was always that, but to see the newer Tomb Raider games, they're largely inspired by Uncharted.
Right. So that's the interesting thing, where Uncharted has basically inspired Tomb Raider to become far more story-driven in the way that it's executed. It's still open world to an extent, at least the first one
The first one was, the second one isn't so much, but I get what you mean there, but we're not talking about Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto. We're not talking about those kind of games.
They do have single-player content to them and stories, but linear is what
you literally could avoid those stories and just keep playing the game sideways if you wanted, and that's the idea with games like this. There are characters, there's rules, there's a world that follows in one direction, and anyone that plays the game essentially gets the same experience, which is not a bad thing. You know, that's how Zelda was. That's how...
That's true.
Not every Zelda, most notably the most recent Zelda, isn't like that, but there's a lot of games like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because the first Zelda games did feel very, well, a little bit more linear, I guess, right?
Like in terms of the first,
the first one was basically a mini open world game.
Yes, it was. That's true. And there's some other entries in this series that you could basically go around wherever you wanted, and you could kind of complete quests in one direction or another.
Right.
But we did get to a point where the games felt very one-directional, and you went in that direction to complete things.
Even if they were semi-open world, it did feel like you're being guided. A place here.
Like, okay, there's a rock over there, but I can't get over that rock unless I have the grappling hook.
And
I
gotta go to this dungeon first. Yeah. So it's interesting to see, like, of course, now Zelda is this huge sprawling open world, and it feels like nowadays, because of costs and because maybe developers feel like there's only a few different avenues. It's like either you can have a huge multiplayer game that continues to make money, or you have a huge open world game where people continue to play and possibly get DLC, or, you know, people are a little bit afraid to go with the single player story driven,
it's very true. And that was basically true with Uncharted as well, because as many people out there may remember, Uncharted wasn't just a single player story all the way through. There was a very big multiplayer component on there, which I've played many of the multiplayer portions of the Uncharted games, and I gotta say, never liked any of them. It's never been a good focus for me. I've always felt that it really didn't live up to the experience of what it was trying to be, because what I got from the games were not the interesting gameplay dynamics, but again, it was the story. So it's a very interesting kind of philosophy. Do you focus on a single player experience totally in its development cycle, knowing that that game isn't going to survive a couple weeks out? After a while, it's just going to kind of fade away. Now, an interesting aspect of this is, as weird as this may be, the recent release of Hitman. Now, Hitman had a basic model where you bought the game, or you could subscribe to the game, and you would get new maps every so often, every couple of months. Now, those new maps really did expand the way that you played the game, but essentially, in a single-player experience, traditionally, that would have been just given to you outright. You know, you would have gotten that game and you would have got all those maps in one go, which is how Hitman 2 is going. But the initial Hitman Well, that wasn't really what they did. They wanted to really make it a little bit of a different experience and keep players coming there for a long time.
It worked.
Yeah, I mean, for most people, I think, but I believe the game could have really done more interesting items. But there's things that the game has done to really keep people coming back. Now, Hitman is a single player experience. Okay, that's what the game is. It's not really linear because you can choose to do whatever you want in one direction.
Is it story driven?
It is story driven.
Oh, it is.
But basically, every single assassination that takes place in the game has to be done either in a specific way, which isn't always the case, or it just basically these people have to die. No matter what it is, at the very end of the level, that character has to be no more. Once that happens, you get a cutscene, you go on to the next level, you get a little bit more story elements, and sometimes the story elements are actually brought to you in the game as well. And the experience of playing Hitman is kind of changing the world up as you go. What I see for a game like Hitman is when I play a game like Hitman, I see an entire stage filled with a bunch of actors that are playing out a specific role in unique ways. And that's really interesting to me because I can go back to that level multiple times and experience assets of the story that you normally wouldn't have seen from one go all the way through. And to me, that's a single player experience, much like the same way Uncharted is. But Uncharted, and the way that those games usually go about it, is you're in that one hallway for that 1 minute and a story element is presented to you.
It feels
then
like
another hallway.
You're directed aesthetically, like, and visually, like exactly where to go.
Exactly.
And it's you very rarely replay scenarios unless like reach a fail state or something.
That's true.
That, right?
But I think what Hitman did was really smart in some of the things. Now, I've never been a huge fan of the contracts that they provided, which were these like one-time contracts. I forget the names of them.
Were they time sensitive?
They were. They were. Boy, I forget the name of those things. But anyway, these contracts, elusive contracts. There you go. The elusive contracts would come up really quickly, and you'd only have maybe 24 hours, maybe a week to complete it, and you only had one chance to go at it. Here's the thing. Those kind of elements presented in a single-player experience can be side stories that are just brought on for a little bit just to keep the gameplay going and keep people wanting to buy the game for, months and months to come. They can be little things like additional weapons, clothing items, little, like, even directed-by things. Where in Half-Life, Half-Life 2, there's this really cool mode where you could actually go through the entire game. I think with Episode 2 specifically, you could go through the whole game, and you could actually hit these little icons, and the people that made the game would tell you what was going on in the game world, and it's basically like a commentary
I think that was
track.
Lost Coast did that. Right?
Yeah,
and they did that with Team Fortress as well.
And that is a really smart way to kind of expand the world because it gives people a reason to go back. And look, getting your game developers to sit down and just have a conversation and record that and put it into the game costs virtually nothing, And those are the kind of things that you can add on to more. Utilizing the already built-in assets that you made for the game and that kind of stuff can really expand what is a single-player experience. And I think that there's this idea that once you've made a single-player game, it's done. And it doesn't grow beyond that.
Right.
And I feel that that is a strictly old-school way of thinking that really doesn't apply in the modern game industry.
Right. Well, so we have seen some single-player games that were not open world, that were like the sort of streamlined, sort of cinematic experiences like The Last of Us, have DLC later on that took this game that could have been a one playthrough for you or I or anyone else, and kind of beefed up the story a little bit. So we got The Last of Us Left Behind. There can be story DLC and things like that that can beef things up as well, right?
I think that one thing that you see with a lot of those games too is that when they try to do a replayability on a single player experience, and this is something I'm going to hate to say this. Deus Ex is a single-player experience. It is a one-time play for me, and then I'll go back and play it again, I'll go back and play it again, and that's a rarity for me. But that game has multiple ways to go about a level, multiple ways to play.
I figure it's a little more Hitman-esque in that way, that you can, like, approach from the vents, or like...
You can be stealthy, you can go in guns
kill
blazing.
Everyone.
Exactly, right? There's a lot of different ways there, but I feel that there's a lot of games being developed right now that offer too much of that, where it's so open, so wide, that you really don't have any goal in mind because you just have so much stuff that could be possible. That sounds like it's a really good idea, but think about it this way. Have you ever been like really hungry and you went to a grocery store to buy some food and you're just like, what do I get?
That's me every week.
Yeah. That happens when you play video games that are just so wide and open that you simply don't know what to do.
Yeah.
No one task is easy. No one task is difficult. Everything is just a melange of muted colors.
Right.
And that's what you get with a couple of games that try to do too much.
It can feel overwhelming. And when you have a game that directs you in a way as like, well, no, you just have to get through these story beats. Like the flow's there. And sometimes you can connect better with the characters and with the unraveling plot around you.
That's true. Yeah. See, for me, I believe that the first-person gameplay experience can still exist as it is today, even if they were to put on single player experience. Yeah. And even if they were to put on some kind of multiplayer aspect to it, I understand that, although it's not always needed.
I almost feel like that is like leftovers from the weird sort of early 2010s where they're like, no, everything needs multiplayer. Like, remember when we had game passes and things where your online pass? And
it's true.
Yeah.
I think where you really start to see like a large evolution of multiplayer games, I know this is going to sound weird, but I think the time I started to see a prominent use of this was when they released GoldenEye. GoldenEye primarily was supposed to be a first-person game, single-player experience, and then the multiplayer was kind of added on after the fact.
It was a huge afterthought, and they didn't think it would do make any waves whatsoever. And it was huge. It was enormous.
Like if you really think about this, some of the best games that exist on the Nintendo 64, and this isn't in every case because there is quite a few interesting single-player experiences, but the games that we have in our office that we go back to playing to all the time, they're the multiplayer games, right? That's Mario Kart 64, that's Perfect Dark, that's those experiences. And although many of them do have single-player experiences themselves in those games, the focus largely was on multiplayer. Even if it was an afterthought, it was the reason people kept going back to play those games.
Right.
And I think there's this idea that they can come back to that, but in the modern game industry, the way we're seeing things now is we're kind of missing that in-home experience where you can just pop in a game and play with a couple friends.
Right.
And they're starting to focus on the online assets and these online worlds that can be really difficult. Now, I played Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, and originally when they released that newer version of the game, it included a multiplayer version that was garbage. I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that say this was a great game, and you're wrong. I'm sorry. You really are.
Subsistence is a good game, but the multiplayer.
Yeah, Subsistence is a good game. Okay. It's just... This isn't a game that needed multiplayer. It was done on there more as a test, and they turned off the servers so quickly after they went up.
So maybe they knew too.
Yeah, the game was so difficult, so weird to play, never felt right. And in fact, any Metal Gear game I've ever played online, it always felt like it was pushed in there by some third party that didn't really want it there.
Ground Zeroes.
Yeah, it's just, it never feels like it worked. That
was the Phantom Pain, wasn't it?
Phantom Pain, yeah. It never felt like it really worked. And that kind of stuff happens when... I just think of it this way. How much cooler would the game have been if they focused on making newer first single player experience elements that were not multiplayer?
Right.
Imagine the amount of time they could have saved to develop other things that could have made the game extend its shelf life a lot more. Maybe, you do offer some kind of multiplayer if you want, but not that. They were taking what was essentially a sneaking game and turning it into a multiplayer experience, which didn't work.
Because I feel like these multiplayer experiences now are trying to focus on these little nuggets of money from people, whereas like a chunk of DLC coming out for a story-based AAA single-player game would be like a $10 purchase.
That's
and
true.
Maybe there are people looking at the numbers and saying like, hey, we can get away with doing what they did in Metal Gear Solid 5 and, slowly take a little bit of money here or there from people and they see more profits instead of maybe finishing the game.
Well, see, the interesting thing about Grand Theft Auto 5 is that inherently when I played that game...
I was Metal Gear Solid 5.
Oh, sorry, Metal Gear Solid 5. Well, Metal Gear Solid 5, interesting enough, Metal Gear Solid 4 had a multiplayer experience that was kind of unlocked after the game had come out, and then now the game has been patched, so when you go to start it up, it just erases that mode completely. You can't even access it in the main menu. That's garbage, but that's what happens when they produce something that they have no need for, no care for having it survive. In that one instance with GoldenEye where they made that multiplayer mode, every company out there was like, well, if they threw it together in a weekend, we can do that too, and that never works out.
Right.
Grand Theft Auto 5, when they made that, I know a lot of us really treat Grand Theft Auto as a single-player experience, but there's a lot of people out there that treat it as a multiplayer experience. That game feels like it's a consistent online world. The events that happen online shift the single-player experience offline. You can get vehicles and cars, like radio stations. Things keep expanding in the single player world because they're affecting the online world. And at any point when you're playing, you can just instantly switch over to your online avatar. That means that that game from its base was always built with online in mind. That's what changes that experience. A lot of people out there may look at that game as a single player experience, and it is for a majority of the game, but realistically it is an online experience always designed from the ground up in that regard. Now, when it comes to games like Uncharted...
Yeah, I want to focus specifically on those, like the new God of War, The Last of Us, Uncharted. These are still like huge sort of gambles, right? We're talking like, to make a game like this, like $50 million before thinking about publishing the game, like producing the product, 100%. Advertising, and then you're into the hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
So what I say for games like that is, okay, it's a single-player experience, right? It's story-focused. Focus on co-op gameplay. That's your goal. That's the place you should be. Think about it this way, folks. Left 4 Dead was a really cool game that was released on Steam years and years ago, but Left 4 Dead is basically a co-op experience from the beginning to the end.
And tiny short stories.
And yeah, that's what it is, right? Uncharted, you want those co-op experiences with friends. You want to be able to explore more of the world together, and you want that kind of stuff. If you really want to, make randomly generated co-op experience worlds that shift up the level and then create different puzzles that are based on several different mechanics that kind of just Rubik's Cube together, and then you kind of go in and experience a whole new thing. That could be done, and it would be really fun,
right? It could be, and I could see that being done while still not completely tarnishing whatever story they're going with.
Exactly.
If it's just maybe playing with the dynamics of the level itself, but keeping those same story beats there.
Exactly.
Like Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that I think would really work out. Having those kind of elements baked into the game so that people can go online and play it with friends. And then there's unlockables and stuff like that,
I
right?
still very much think that if you make great story-based DLC, people will buy it.
Yeah. See, for God of War, that's a great example of a really good single-player experience that everyone seems to like. Well, why would you make that a player versus player environment? Why wouldn't you just make a co-op experience based off that stuff? Right? That's
you got 2 characters there.
I know,
it's
right?
Like perfect.
And see, that's the kind of stuff that can really work. I believe that when Amy Hennig is speaking about these kind of single-player experiences, I believe that she feels that single-player experiences can also be experienced with other people. It's just the way that we basically attribute that word to gameplay. We just think of it as being a solo experience when it can be, but it doesn't always have to be that way. I really feel co-op is the way to make multiplayer games work for those single experiences.
It could be one of many solutions to this.
Yeah.
But we have seen success from many of these games. My only sort of like problem is that when it does come to these single-player experiences, not that many new IPs are being pushed out.
It's true.
It's mostly sequels, and I feel like people are scared to toss a lot of money into something that could possibly not pay off, which makes sense, I guess.
Speaking from a developer's point of view, I would imagine it would be far more scarier to run a single-player or a multiplayer experience that doesn't work, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have all the server costs, they have all that thing to happen. And then what happens if you turn off the servers and then create this bad blood with your community, right? There are issues with those games that can exceed the cost of just making a single-player experience. I mean, we don't have to have Uncharted levels of game design every single month, right? But you can have a really good, quick experience of a game like Portal, right? Just a couple of hours of really solid gameplay, and then you can extend on that. You know, when it comes to single-player experiences where they've been kind of slowly releasing them over a time period, that's Telltale Games right down to a T. Those guys are capable of making a really cool story in almost every single game they make, and they break it up with just chunks of gameplay chapters that can get released slowly over a couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that way the game has a longer lifespan. Right. People get into
that's almost like feeding into that story DLC thing, but that is the structure of their games. It's like it almost is DLC. Every single episode is like a 2-hour chunk, right?
Yeah, right. And I think that's really one of the ways to do it. But folks, what do you think? Do you think single-player experiences are worth it in video games, or do you think that, well, Amy Hennig is wrong and they should be putting in tons of multiplayer features in every single player experience they have? Let us know in the comments below.